What's going on, everybody? I'm DJ Sixsmith. You're watching The Sit Down. Very pleased to be joined by World Series champ Ron Swoboda. What's up? How are you?
DJ, good to see you, man.
Very nice to meet you. How's everything going?
Everything is rolling, man. I'm about 10 and a half weeks out of triple bypass surgery.
Yeah, you feeling good?
I think they fixed me up.
Wow.
I got my 75,000-mile checkup. I think I'm good to go for the next 10.
Isn't that amazing? You get a little tune-up, and I'm sure you feel like a brand new dude in some ways.
Well, it was either get that or, have an abrupt end to everything.
Right.
I'll
Adios
take this.
real quick. Yeah.
It's a rough little surgery, but not bad, and I think I had good work done, and I'm feeling great.
That's awesome. And you and your buddies are getting back together tonight here in the city. The 69 team, some of the guys are here today. Yeah,
we're going downtown for Ed Randall's Cure, Fans for the Cure is what he calls it, but little, just what you want to talk about at the age of 75, your prostate.
Yeah, it's like,
he does a lot of good work, and guys need to have an awareness.
It's like, maybe we'll talk about my book, maybe we'll talk 69, as much as I'd love to talk about my prostate, we'll leave that one behind.
Well, when you were younger, you wanted to use it rather than talk about it, but tonight we'll settle for whatever comes up.
Yeah.
But it's a good night, and I'll be with Art Shamsky, Ed Kranepool, and Leon Jones is coming in, one of our favorite guys.
That's awesome. So Sham was here earlier this year, I told you that, and I got to relive the whole 69 run with him. I mean, you're a 25-year-old guy. Here you are here making the catch of your life. When you guys get back together, what are the feelings that come to the surface immediately?
We're so comfortable with one another. It's funny because Ed and Art Shamsky and I did a little. We were like the three tenors. We did 3 or 4 gigs where Vegas, we went out and told stories and answered questions, and boy, people made you feel like you were such an important part of it growing up. It's like really a wonderful way to celebrate 50 years, telling the stories, and people really into it, knew what was going on. Great fans who hadn't forgotten you, and 50 years. Try to figure out where 50 years goes.
Yeah. It's a long time.
All good, though.
So when you were writing this book, obviously you go back into your childhood, you go through the 69 season. Yeah. What were some parts of that story you kind of forgot that you were able to brush up on again? Yeah,
I dug into, I had 15 or 20 books from contemporary writers. We had great sports writers back then. And you need your memory refreshed on some things.
Totally.
And if they say it better than you can say it, and a lot of them could, you quote them and attribute it. But thing you can do too, online, you can go back and look at all the play-by-play sheets and relive every one of those games, almost every pitch, and look at Gil Hodges, our manager in '69. Look at the decisions he made and when he made them, and you realize how unbelievably adroit he was as a baseball guy, and wonder more than ever right now why he's not in the Hall of Fame.
I can't believe he's not in the Hall of Fame, and this is what we were talking about with Sham. It just doesn't make sense to me.
All I think, what happens is the people that do the deciding are younger and younger, and they've forgotten some of these people and what they meant to the game of baseball. Gil's got one more shot, I believe, and if he doesn't end up in the Hall of Fame, there's something wrong with the process in my book.
No, I agree. Even just platooning you and Sham. That was a really big
love
decision.
it.
Yeah.
Sham will tell you that.
Egos,
but Shamsky was a good hitter, and a little skinny guy with these great hands, and he could get to the ball, and he and I, once we settled down and I started doing something, he had a pretty good year. Once he got his back straightened out, he had a pinched nerve in his hip early in the season. When he came back strong, and I was the one floundering around. But into August, there was a point where I got to play, and I got to do a few things, and he and I became a strict platoon in right field. And we produced almost 100 RBIs, which back in that day is not too bad.
You're taking that, that's for sure.
Yeah, 2 for the price of 1.
Yeah, hey, whatever works, right?
Yeah.
I'm reading your book, and I'm reading about your story growing up in Maryland, and the fact that the Mets are playing the Orioles in the '69 World Series. There's something poetic about that. The fact that you made the play against Baltimore, did you realize everything that was happening in that moment, that it would be such a grand moment that you'd be talking about the rest of your life?
I had played as an amateur in Memorial Stadium where the Orioles played. I had worked out with the Orioles, wearing their uniform as a kid and before I signed with the New York Mets. So I'd been in Memorial Stadium, but when I ran on the field in Game 1 of the '69 World Series, I felt like all of that history, all of those memories, all of those thoughts just crowded my brain, and it was a little daunting, and I ran out there nervous as heck in the outfield, and of course Don Buford, first hitter up, hits a ball that I really should have caught. And I do everything wrong. I work my tail off to become a better outfielder, getting good jumps on the ball, locating it and getting to where you needed to go and catching the darn thing. Well, I did everything. When I look back at that now, I look lost. I look like that robot in Star Wars, you know, 3PO or something. You know, I never get back. I get back late to the fence. I jump. I don't have the ball located. It goes for a home run, and I thought it was all on me, you know, and I come back in the dugout and I'm yelping about it. Eddie Kranepool, who's a New York guy, you know, he's got that New York, you know, he said something pretty sharp to me, like, shut the you-know-what up and catch the next one. And you know what? He might as well have said it to the whole team, because we caught everything after that. Yeah,
I mean, especially this play here, to think where you were from Game 1 to Game 4.
Yeah.
And to make that play in the 9th inning, like, just take me back. You've thought about this moment so many times, but when you still think about making that catch, what is the first emotion that you think about? Is it, oh my gosh, I got to catch this ball, or like, I can't believe I caught that ball?
You know, when your eyes move at the speed of thought, you know, and I saw that thing off the bat, and I had worked with Eddie Yost taking thousands of ground balls, and I felt like I had become a better outfielder, worked at getting a better jump on the ball. But when I go into Citi Field, and you can look at that play on in the Mets Museum there as long as you want.
Yes, whenever you want, as long as you
want. I
watched
it 3-4 times, and I'm like, good grief, how'd I get there?
Because that ball is falling quick. Like, I watched it this morning, and I'm like, I can't believe you made that play.
I made a good jump, but I thought 95%, maybe above that, on the way to catching it. I thought, I'm too late.
Yeah.
And, you know, I took the best line I could take. It turned out to be a good one. It hit me right in the web, laid out full on my backhand. And you know, it's one of those plays that I think you never realize how juiced you are, how excited you are on the moment of you're in a World Series. And that was at Shea Stadium where I was more comfortable. And I felt like, you know, I quoted Browning, the poet, who said it better than I could. If you know, if your reach doesn't exceed your grasp, what is heaven for? You know, it's like I made the one play, the most graceful play, and graceful in my name didn't appear in too many sentences at the same time. But this was my graceful moment as a player, and how ironic, with all the work I put in on line drives and ground balls and stuff, that it came at a key point in a World Series in a game we had to win, really.
Yeah, Tom Seaver was pretty happy about that. So.
Well, he would, you know, he could have been the losing pitcher in 2 games. If that gets by me, they go up 2-1 because we didn't score in the bottom of the 9th. We scored in the bottom of the 10th to win it. But you let the Orioles back in that series tied at 2.
Frank
might
Robinson,
be a different deal.
Bruce Robinson, I mean, those guys.
That was a tough team.
Yeah.
And I think they were still in a little state of shock. And when we went up 3-1, we might have got them pressing a little bit.
Yeah, I'd say so. There were a lot of great moments in that run in '69, and then also just the country as a whole, what was going on in the 60s. When you think about things turning to make you guys a championship contender, what was the moment when you said to yourself, like, this team's for real, like, we got a great opportunity this year?
Well, you know, it was funny. There were a couple of points. In late May, end of May, 1st of June, before we do the Don Clendenin deal, we reel off 11 straight wins, and we vaulted into relevance. And I think opened the eyes of our organization, you know, Johnny Murphy, the general manager, and Gil Hodges, our manager. I think they went, wait a minute, something's going on here, because we got in the hunt with 11 straight wins. And that's when they made the Don Clendenin deal and brought in a power guy to platoon at first base with Ed Kranepool. And I thought it was a stroke of genius. Clendenin was the right guy. He's an interesting guy. I mean, he was loud and on everybody in the clubhouse, but always in a good way, you know. And he could get away with it because he was what you would technically call a clubhouse lawyer.
Right.
Except he was the only one I ever knew who was actually studying law, passed the bar exam, and practiced law up in South Dakota for a long, long time. Yeah.
You had some fascinating guys, and you had guys on different ends of the political spectrum, and everybody just coexisted. In today's world, everybody's kind of in their own silo. This was a team, it's like, we're all in this thing together. It doesn't matter what you believe, what you're about, like, we're going to win baseball games.
I think the truth might be back then, people's worldviews weren't as far apart as they are today. So we had conservative guys from the South and African Americans from Texas and Alabama, Cleon Jones and Tommy Agee. We had California guys, you know, from the state of bliss out there, you know. But I think because there were no superstars as such, I think we were able to take that diversity and turn it into something pretty productive. And I tend to believe in diversity myself.
Absolutely.
And I think you make it a strength by trusting people.
Agreed. You faced a lot of great pitchers in your day. You played with Tom Seaver, who was one of the best of all time. When you think about him, what made him so special in your mind?
You know, Seaver, when he showed up in 1967, we were lucky to get him in a lottery draft because the Braves or something had screwed up the signing of him, and he went in the bin, and we pulled him out. And when I saw Tom Seaver in 1967, you saw a guy who was Hall of Fame out of the box. Like you opened up the Tom Seaver box, and here was a Hall of Fame right-handed pitcher, threw hard with command. And I don't think there was any break-in period for Tom. He pitched from the day I saw him in the big leagues with the same kind of command, the same kind of confidence, same kind of strength from day one. What only thing was required was put the time in, amass the numbers that you become an obvious Hall of Fame candidate, which he did. But you never saw any sort of break-in period where Tom got roughed up or looked like the big leagues was a little bit of a puzzle for him. Never.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that because when you think about Nolan Ryan, it really took him a long time to become the guy that we think today. Because back in those days, like, he was struggling with command. Like, he kind of had to take some time to figure some things out.
Yeah, he was a little different pitcher. Power guy with a big curveball and this fastball that could get on you. But remember, he was kind of a high fastball pitcher back then. And the National League with those inside protectors and the umpire down here next to the strike zone was lower. And the reason I know that, when I got traded over to the American League and they were still using those big inner tubes, you know, on the outside, and they umpired up over the catcher's head, their perspective on the strike zone, they called more high strikes. And I think he went to the American League and started having success. And he was able to stay healthy enough and strong enough that he became a power pitcher who could have pitched anywhere once he got rolling. But I think going to the American League was a good thing for him. To get out of that low ball National League.
No question. So winning in New York, we hear it all the time. It's different than anywhere else. You experienced it. Tell me why it is.
New York, you know, I think because New York fans to me and New Yorkers to me, I mean, New York cops, they're the best, and you know, and look at the situations they have to deal with and how able they are. And I knew guys in the fire department, New Yorkers. I mean, you know, real, you know, you lived in neighborhoods that were solid neighborhoods, and I think I think the time I spent in New York, where people paid attention to stuff, they remember you, and they've never forgotten that. You gave them something back in 1969, and the people who are old enough to appreciate it have never forgotten it, and that's a treat when you're 75 years old.
It's amazing.
And you're back here celebrating the 50th anniversary of the most amazing year in your life, and it's in New York. You realize it couldn't have been this good anywhere else. Period.
Who do you miss the most from the '69 team that no longer is around? A lot of guys not here anymore.
Well, I was good friends with Tommy Agee, and he was, a guy I always touched base with. Probably the guy I was closest to was Tug McGraw. Tug was a special guy because he was all heart, and he wore it on his sleeve, and when he pitched, you knew exactly where his head was at. And you think about it, he pitched for the '69 New York Mets, and then he closed for the 1980 Phillies. Their first World Series. He was the guy.
He was the guy. If you needed a first World Series, you called Tug McGraw.
Well, that's what, he used to tell good stories about how when, somebody'd say, what'd you do with your World Series bonuses? And he said, he'd say something to the effect of, I spent most of it on whiskey and women, and the rest of it I just wasted,
You put your money into land, right?
I bought, I came up by train today from Pennsylvania, about 8 miles from. I bought a piece of property in Maryland, up in Shawsville, Maryland, mostly 70 acres, more or less, of oak trees. Red oak, white oak, and black oak. I've never built on it, but my son lives about 8 or 9 miles from there, and they use it. There's a Deer Creek runs through it, and when I was a kid, we had a family farm down in Annapolis, and after the great-grandfather who owned it had passed away, the property stayed in the family, and we used to go down there and have these big gatherings and picnic and shoot guns, and I wanted a place like that for my family, and for a number of years, since I never made an all-star team, how convenient. That really wasn't the reason. I was trying like heck to make it, but for every all-star break while I was in Major League Baseball after 1969, we would go to this property, and my family would bring campers and tents, and we'd go up there with 40, 50, 60 people and just hang out for 3 days during the all-star break, walk around. You can swim in the creek and go fishing and and just enjoy the outdoors. And I still have it. I've been able to keep the property, and my son and his daughters have enjoyed it, and it'll be there. If they do what they're supposed to do when I leave this earth, my ashes will be up there strewn around the place. Unless they trick me.
No, they got to follow. They got to follow those orders.
But that's really what I'd like to have happen, because it's meant that much to me. It was a place to come to for the family, and it was really the World Series sitting out there in the woods in Shawsville.
That's beautiful. And listen, you had some luck along the way. You say that in the book. Yeah. You worked your ass off for it, though. I mean, you were the first in your family to go to college. And describe what you were doing your freshman year, too, because you were there, you didn't have a scholarship. You're sweeping the floors. Explain to everybody out there what you were doing.
University of Maryland, they required you in the baseball program, you got a workship, which meant you cleaned the floors and waxed them in the dormitory, and that would pay for your room and board and books and stuff. And, it didn't seem like too much to ask, Was I the best floor keeper in the University of Maryland? Probably not. but I did my work while I was there, and I ended up about a year and a half. I came up and went to a semester at New York University, and I went out to CW Post and took some more courses. I never really got a college degree, but I cared about learning stuff. I was lucky enough to work at WCBS.
That's right, yeah.
And as off the street, I've said that the only way I belonged in the building was with a mop and a bucket. But I got to work with some really compelling people, and one of the guys was Dave Marish, who was a co-anchor with Rollin Smith of the Evening News, and Dave Marish is still a friend of mine. He lives out in New Mexico, and we started a relationship. He introduced me to a lot of jazz players here in New York at various venues, you know, down in the Village at the Vanguard and the Bottom Line, and a few places where you know, he would sort of lured me around and squire me around and teach me a little something about jazz music, which awesome. I still care about.
Yeah.
And Dave and I talk all the time.
That's awesome. All right, let's talk current day Mets, because we were talking off camera.
Yeah.
Didn't end out so well after a nice little run there in the summer. When you think about who the next manager should be, who is the type of person for this young core that can take the Mets to where you guys were in '69?
You know, I felt bad for Callaway. I know it's hard when a new general manager comes in and you're not his guy, and there's a couple of things that happen maybe that you know, he felt like they needed somebody else to take the next step. I felt bad for him because I think sometimes when you don't have all the pieces, when you don't have a bullpen that can close for you on a regular basis, you make a lot of decisions. You make a lot of decisions that don't work, because you don't have the people to plug in. So I felt like you look at the number of blown saves.
Oh, the one-run games they lost this year. Most in the bigs.
One of the things we did in 1969 that Hodges really aimed at was we won a majority of our one-run game. You win those because you close out. You get leads in the 6th, 7th inning, and you hang on to them. And that was not something they were good at last year. If they figure that out, that team's got some pieces in the puzzle. And I think the next manager, you know, you look at this World Series and the guys that are, you know, managing in it. One of my favorites, A.J. Hinch of the Astros. I'm an Astros fan, really, even though they're now in the American League. But
he's great.
I like the organization. When you listen to him talk, you feel like this guy could just transition right into broadcasting.
Totally.
You know? But he makes sense. He's with an organization that supplied him the tools. If the Mets will do that, I think you can find a good young guy who knows how to relate to players and deal with the media, because now, you know, a manager has to be able to handle a media crunch that's on you all the time.
Especially here in New York. I mean, forget it.
And don't leave them with some ideas that are a little cockamamie. You know, stuff has to add up.
Yeah.
And you do that, you can do it in New York. It's doable here. I believe the guy is findable. You probably won't hear, you know, I've heard a bunch of names bandied about, but I don't know who that guy is. I just finished doing AAA baseball, and you know, I couldn't tell you who you ought to get, but I think the most important thing is you get the right guy, but give him that end of the bullpen guy that can
the pieces.
Save some games for you. And you'll look smarter already, because you found a bunch of hitters. The Mets found a bunch of hitters. They didn't know what Alonso was going to do. McNeil, you know, had some signs last year.
J.D. Davis comes out of nowhere.
Smith. J.D. Davis is a player, but Smith. And you're playing these guys out of position, and they hunker down and play some pretty good baseball. And you have that rotation in place. I think if you leave that alone and just let these guys develop, and you know, who knows, Lowry might, you know.
We just got to get these guys. Cespedes, you know, maybe he'll come back.
Magic of medical miracles, maybe he'll come back and be good. He's not a bad player. Cespedes, I don't know. I'm a little sour on Cespedes. I think he'd rather drive his cars around and play golf.
I mean, there was a great run there with the World Series.
He was good when they got him. He was the guy when they got him.
But then after that.
But later on, it looked like he didn't want to play. And I'm like, if you don't want to play, fine. We got some guys that want to play. And that's pretty obvious. So I think the next manager could be a very fortunate guy. If he's the right guy, could be a very fortunate guy, because they're not bereft of talent.
Yeah, no question. So you had a bunch of guys in '69 that wanted to play, that were about their business.
Those one-year contracts,
so a little bit different, right? When you think about your team, winning a World Series. What do you want the legacy of the '69 Mets to be?
I want people to feel like, you know, when they try to think back to this team that found itself, okay, because we were bubbling around 500, which would have been an improvement, but that wasn't what they were after. Gil Hodges said in spring training, this team, I think, can win 85 games. And in spring training, I remember me and Ed Kramer looking at one another and going, us? Talking about
We're talking about the same team here?
Yeah, excuse me.
The 100 lost Mets?
They had won 73. We won 73 the year before, and I had been on teams that lost 100 games. I'm more than I had been on more teams that lost 100 than would win 100, like we did for the first time in 1969. So we were a bunch of guys who showed up and wanted to play, and the game was the most important thing in our lives. It wasn't ego, it wasn't the money. We were professional players, but we tried to give Gil Hodges the pieces he needed and the buttons to push, because he was an amazing manager whose I think platoon program made a difference in that team, and the way he handled the pitching and the way they coached it up, I think allowed us to surprise some people, including ourselves.
This guy helped the Mets be amazing in 1969. That's Ron Swoboda.
Thank you, man.
Thank you so much. Really nice to meet you. Check out his book, Here's the Catch, available in bookstores now. For Ron, I'm DJ. See you next time here on The Sit Down.